Hey guys, how's it going? This is Natinator. Welcome back to your weekly dose of creepypasta. Tonight's story might make it a tad difficult to sleep. Don't worry, I'm sure there's nothing under your bed. Or is there? Well, one thing that won't jump out at you in the middle of the night are our lovely patrons over on Patreon. Big thank you to you guys. Shout outs, as always, to the Disciples, Tiffany, Subscribe SoundCloud, Backwards D-Dog, Ali G, Vera Ohio, Sylvia Kirschbaum, Jelly, Jim Jam Bonks, Seth B. Myers, Amberly Perry, Teddy Dog, and Brooklyn Gonzalez. Thank you so much for supporting me for yet another month, keeping the channel going. It's amazing. You are the best. Now, as always, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story begin. Ever had a fear of monsters under your bed? Like you could have sworn you saw what seemed to be a shadow moving down there? Or freaked out when you heard a noise under the bed and was scared to look? I don't expect anybody to believe me on this, nor do I even care anymore. I've told this to anyone and everyone I've ever known, but none believed. Not even my best friend. Not even my therapist. At this point, I've given up. And I just tell this as a scary story to my friends. And now I want to show it to the world. For the record, yes, this has happened to me. Believe if you want to. So it started back when I was about 6 years old. My family had moved to a new house in a new neighborhood, but still close enough to my friends. I still slept with my parents at that age and was horribly scared to sleep alone. On restless nights, I had a habit of looking at the closet, seeing the clothes hanging, and imagining the silhouettes of those clothes forming monsters. Sometimes it looked like dark eyes watching me, sometimes just scary shadows. I would think anything was scary at night. When we got to the small house, my mum looked back at me from her seat in the car and told me I had to sleep alone from now on. I begged and I pleaded for her to continue sleeping with them, but no use. Their decision was made. From that age on, I was forced to sleep alone. I played outside with my toys while they put the furniture inside. As the sun got lower and the day started to turn into night, a strange fear crept into my body. I kept looking at the sunset, silently begging for it to stay up, when my mother called me in for dinner. As soon as I was finished with dinner, my mother told me to go to sleep because I had school the next day. They went as well shortly after me. I closed my room door tight, closed all the windows in the closet, and tried going to sleep. It took me a while, but eventually I dozed off, only to be awakened a few minutes later by the sound of tapping. At first I thought it was my mum knocking at the door, but realized it came from under my bed. Random taps, not in a pattern or anything. It sounded like someone with long fingernails was tapping on the wood, right below my upper back. When I finally fully woke up and began to realize that someone or something was tapping below my bed, it stopped. I believed that it was just something of my imagination and went back to sleep. I was woken again, a few hours later, by the same tapping. Again, as soon as whatever was under there saw that I had awoken, it stopped. I resumed my sleeping, only believing it was my imagination. I awoke the next morning still feeling tired. I went to school, got home, ate dinner, and went to sleep again. A little less scared by sleeping alone, but only a little. Just like last time, the tapping woke me up. Only this time I didn't ignore it, because it didn't stop like last time. It just continued. A small tapping right under my upper back. Then it changed to something that sent shivers down every inch of my body. It changed to a sound like as if it was running its fingernails along the wood, scratching, sort of. I could almost feel the vibrations going from the left side of my shoulder to the right. God, it was terrifying. I didn't dare move or make a noise. I even slowed my breathing. This noise continued for minutes, hours. I couldn't go to sleep with that horrible tapping and scratching under my bed. Then the noise grew louder. It grew from a tapping to a knocking, then from a knocking to a large banging. I panicked and screamed for my parents. They came rushing in, my dad with a baseball bat. They asked what had happened. I only told them I'd heard a noise from my bed. They looked under it, but of course, nothing was there. My mum told me to go to bed, and I reluctantly did. A wave of fear once again crept over me as she turned off the lights. A few minutes after they had left, I turned the lights on and checked under the bed myself. A bold move for a 6-year-old, but nothing. At least, until I checked the boards. There were deep, etched scratch marks on it. I immediately ran to my parents' room and asked to sleep with them. They let me. The next few days I slept with them, until they decided I was comfortable enough to go back to my room. I begged them to let me continue sleeping with them, but they didn't budge. I stayed awake the whole entire night. The tapping never started. At school, I fell asleep almost the entire time. This went on for about a week, until my teacher called my mum, asking if I was sleeping well. My mom eventually found out I wasn't sleeping and grounded me. Eventually I started sleeping again. That's when the tapping started again. Every single day I was awoken with this terrible tapping and scratching. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. I could no longer concentrate in school and my grades were terrible. One particular night was different. I entered my room and went to sleep. As always, the tapping woke me up after an hour or so, except this time it was on the side of the bed, where my feet were. I rubbed my eyes. I waited a bit for my eyes to get accustomed to the dark. And when I did, I saw the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. Sitting right beside my feet, its back toward me, and its hand tapping the bed. It was sitting on the edge of my own bed. It looked somewhat like a hairless cat, except it was humanoid. It had no hair anywhere on its body or head. Its hands were full of veins, and it had huge, slightly broken fingernails. They looked like they could tear anyone's skin completely off, especially mine. The body was like an old man's body, wrinkly and old. That thing looked like it hadn't eaten in forever. I was terrified, in shock. After a few seconds, it began turning its back and heading toward me. It had no eyes. Its skin covered the eye sockets and its mouth completely, like a puppet. The nose wasn't there either. Even though it had no eyes, it seemed to focus only on me. It radiated an emotion, sadness. It was as if it wanted me to give myself to him so he could eat me, satisfying its hunger and taking away his sadness. For some reason, I was tempted. I was in a trance, but I quickly snapped out of it and passed out from so much fear. The next morning, I awoke and immediately told my mum we had to move out. I screamed, cried, and begged until she was finally convinced something was bothering me and told my dad we had to move out. So we did. Fast forward to 3 years later, I now live in a neighborhood far away from before. The image of that thing still haunts my memories and my nightmares, but I'd never seen it again since that night. I've never told my friends or family of what happened again, because they never believed me. My little sister was born only a few months ago. Her name was Julie. She always slept with my parents and I was a bit jealous. I was still afraid of sleeping alone due to what happened. My friends were always making fun of me because of that. One day, my best friend Zach invited me over to sleep at his house. I was very excited to go, until I got to his house. He had recently moved to the house I used to live in. As I got my backpack full of stuff out of my mum's car, a wave of fear crept over my body when I turned around to see the old house I had once lived and almost died in. I walked up to the old wooden door to see my friend opening it and greeting me with a large smile. "Took you long enough," he said. Yeah, sorry. Is this your house?" I said silently, hoping it wasn't. "Yeah, of course it is. Whose else's would it be, idiot? Now come on, let's see my new house." I was hesitant to go in, but there was no turning back now. I entered and looked back to my friend closing the door behind me. I didn't tell him I'd once lived there, out of, once again, fear of that beast hearing me. The whole day I wouldn't feel comfortable staying in the house, and would always suggest we go outside and play ball. He suggested we play with his new video game, but I always said I didn't like playing, even though I did. Finally, while we were out playing soccer in the front lawn, Zach's mum told us it was time to go inside, eat dinner, and soon after, go to sleep. My heart stopped. I looked out into the night sky and realized I hadn't even seen the day go by. It went so fast. I wish it hadn't. As I was eating, all I could think about were that thing's eyes, or eye sockets. Even so, I'd always been certain it was looking right at me that night it appeared. Its whole face covered in its own skin, almost like it was suffocated under it. But it could breathe fine, I thought. Maybe it was all a dream, I thought, but no. It was too real to be a dream. Dreams are usually like watching TV with a bad signal. Poor image and lots of static. An illusion, maybe. I thought to myself, was it all an illusion? It could have been. What with all the fears I had when I was smaller. But even then I was skeptical. "Time to go to bed, kids. Hurry up now," Zach's mum said to us. Zach had 2 beds. He was on the left corner of the room, and mine was right beside. I laid down on my bed and looked at the ceiling, as Zach almost instantly fell asleep. I was scared. No, I was terrified. I think I spent about an hour and a half awake before I finally caught some sleep. Once I did, I started to dream about that thing. In my dream, I was waking up in my bed after hearing some tapping. As usual, I opened my eyes and saw nothing, though the tapping continued. For some unknown reason, I was somehow more brave than in real life, and decided to look underneath my bed. What I saw made my heart want to die. Under my bed, slowly turning his bald head toward me, was what I thought was the monster, but was actually Zach. Though Zach wasn't bald, he had hair in real life, though in my dream I stopped my thinking. This thing was literally wearing my best friend's face, on his own. Even as a 9-year-old, I knew it was pretty much impossible for you to wear someone else's face on your own. But this monster did just that. For the first time, I saw this thing smile at me. He was smiling. A big, toothless grin stared down at me for what seemed like an eternity. He then lashed his hand out at me and instantly pierced my heart. I woke up, trying to scream, but to no success. What I saw kept my scream lodged in my throat. On top of me was him, staring me down, making what seemed like a smile, or at least trying to make one, though he had no mouth. When he saw that I'd woken up, he quickly scurried out of my room, bumping into the walls. I tried to take a look to see where he was going, but he was out of my sight, and I was too terrified to get out of bed. Zach was right beside me, sleeping peacefully. I tried to wake him, but he wouldn't budge. He slept like a rock, so I stayed there, awake for the rest of the night. But I felt like I was alone, even though Zach was right there. Around 6 a.m., I heard Zach's parents getting up, and I immediately opened the door and ran to them, begging them to take me home. They asked why, and I tried to tell them about the monster that tried to kill me. Though, as expected, they didn't believe me. I begged and cried until they finally took me home. While I was in their car, I couldn't stop wondering where that thing might have gone off to. 10 years passed by. I was in college and was in my car, driving toward my mum's house for the holidays. Dad had passed away, and it was my sister's 10th birthday. At one point, I looked down at her present in the passenger seat next to me. I was going to give her what she'd always wanted. The new doll that had come out a few weeks ago. The commercial showed it could walk and talk by itself. Strange thing for a doll to do, but my sister would love it. As I neared my mother's house, I noticed the growing amount of parked cars. I thought to myself, this must be a huge party for a 10-year-old. I finally found a place to park my car and grabbed the doll, got out of my car, and made my way to the house. Mum's eyes lit up when she saw me, and she ran toward me to give me a big hug. She then ran back to the house to call my sister, so I could give her my present. As expected, Julie loved it, and immediately showed all her little friends. Unlike me, my sister was quite the popular little girl in school. I guess she didn't inherit Mum's shyness like I did. My whole life I was a shy and introverted kid. As the party went on, I chatted with the adults as the kids ran around the house playing with their toys. Somehow, the subject of the conversation shifted to something that instantly brought chills down my spine. The parents began talking about a certain kid who died about 3 years ago. In the same house, I nearly died 10 years ago. The memories brought pain to my head, and I told the parents I needed to go to the room I was sleeping in to lay down for a bit. I opened the door and laid down on the bed to see if I might get better. As I looked to the ceiling, the memory of that night kept replaying in my head over and over and over again, until I closed my eyes and almost instantly fell asleep. I don't remember exactly what I dreamed about that night, but I awoke to silence, except for a familiar sound that, along with bringing fear into my body, also brought hatred. A hatred I seemed to have bottled up inside of me for more than 13 years. Almost instinctively, I looked under my bed. Instead of staying still like I usually would have done, my heart stopped. Almost instinctively, I looked under my bed. Instead of staying still like I usually would have done, my heart stopped. Almost touching my face was his, looking me in the eye. His leathery skin covering his face was merely an inch from mine. For that moment, everything was silent, and by everything I mean everything. There was not a single sound. No cars passing by, no humming of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Nothing. From there, everything was a blur. All I remember was him clumsily running out of my room, going in the direction of my mother's room, where she and my sister were sleeping. Things only became clear when I suddenly found myself hunched over my mum and sister. I looked around me, but no monster. As my eyes wandered back toward my mum, all I began to see was blood and guts. The skin off her face was completely torn off. The same to my sister. They both seemed to stare at me with their lidless eyes. I stood still. I couldn't even cry. My heart was racing. As I began to panic, I felt a heavy breathing behind my neck, and suddenly, a smack to my head knocked me out completely. I woke up tired and dizzy. The back of my head still hurt, and everything was still blurry. As things began to clear up, and I got up from my dirty, slightly blood-stained bed, I noticed metal bars to my right. Immediately, I ran up to them to see what was going on. All I heard were crazy, deranged screams all around me. "Who's there?" I asked in the darkness. All around me, I began to hear small giggles coming from inside the cells. Then the screams began again. I waited for a bit, and waited and waited. After what seemed like a few hours, dozens of lights turned on, and a door on the right end of the hallway opened. I ran up to the metal bars and tried to see who it was. After a few moments, a bald, bearded man in a lab coat came into sight. He walked all the way toward my cell and stopped, turned toward me with a key in his hand, and told me to follow him. He escorted me toward where he came from, as a bunch of hands tried to touch us. A few had nails that were long and sharp, others had chunks of skin ripped off their fingers, some both. The guy with the lab coat took me to a normal-looking room and calmly told me to have a seat at the table in the middle. He took a seat in front of me. So tell me, from beginning to end, Mr. Richards, what exactly happened to you? He handed me a notebook to write what happened in my cell, a present from him to pass the time. For about a week I've been writing. During that week, I've had numerous appointments with therapists. They all tell me the same thing, that all that happened to me was an illusion of my mind, and that basically it led to me killing my mum and sister. They told me a name for the condition, but I've already forgotten it. Doesn't matter anyway. It's bullshit. After a few days, I realized I was in a mental institution for crazy people. They let me call someone, and I decided to call Zach. Not even he believed me. No one did. They don't want to help me or us. They just want to see us lose our minds and rot in this place, like most of the prisoners here. But I know he's still out there. He visited me tonight. You know, I woke up in the middle of the night, and there he was, sitting at the edge of my bed, facing away from me. I didn't do anything. I just watched him. He turned toward me, and I saw my mother's face, staring at me with a happy, psychopathic smile.